Thank you. Beautiful.
All
How
right.
does that feel?
Thank you.
Do we have any echo or not?
We still do, but I'm gonna try to figure out how to deal
Oh,
with
yeah.
it. It's a
Yeah.
very strange delay, but maybe we can.
Yeah. We'll get used to it. Well,
It's like
George,
all very delayed. Yeah.
really, that's very
Yeah.
strange. This technology of far away streaming, I guess, has some limitations. Um, George, thank you so much, and let's welcome George Colligan, our jazz pianist. And we, I wanted to read to you just a few reviews of George's work. One review says, George is one of the best kept secret in jazz by Chris Hoven, all about jazz. Another said, as a creative artist, he's really up there in terms of a technique, knowledge of music, and improvisational creativity. There are not a whole lot of cats from his generation that are any better than him. As a matter of fact, I cannot think of any. That was by Don Brandon in a blindfold test for Jazz Times. I guess it's some kind of a musical journal. So thank you so much, George, and for joining me today and to play for us. And tell us, where are you right now? How are you?
Ching, I am in Portland, Oregon, and I've been living here since 2011. I lived in New York City for about 15 years, and I have been teaching out here in Oregon, and I've been trying to sort of come back to New York whenever I could to make music, and so I've been balancing teaching with still performing up until the recent crisis. So that has sort of changed everything, and it's kind of surreal. But in a way, though, it's made it so we can do stuff like this, and we're all working on the technology and. In a way, I think that a lot of the things we do on the computer and on our phones and stuff is it's almost like learning an instrument. You kind of have to learn the ins and outs of it. So I think for everybody now it's a learning curve, but we're seeing the positives of it. There are negatives, but I think there are some positives in this that at some point we'll be able to look back and say, you know, well, we all learned how to do this and appreciate this. So,
Right,
you know, yeah.
right. So
But yeah,
tell,
I'm in,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, tell us a little bit about your upbringing. Were you born in East Coast or West Coast or middle somewhere?
I was born in Summit, New Jersey. My parents were both from the tri-state area. My father's from Brooklyn. My mother's from. She was born in Newark. Grew up in East Orange, and so I was born in Summit. So it could have been very likely that you know I could have easily grown up in New Jersey or New York. But my father. Had some other jobs, and so we lived in Florida briefly, and then we lived in Columbia, Maryland, which is right outside of Baltimore. And so I'm essentially that's where I grew up, Columbia, Maryland. I was there from 1973, I guess 1972, 1973, up until I went to college in Baltimore. Um, and so I consider myself an East Coast person, even though I've been out on the West Coast for, you know, I guess about 9 years at this point. But the East Coast is, I think, where my sensibility is. I think it is a very different sensibility, particularly from the music, and especially with jazz. I think there's just more of an East Coast tradition for jazz and for just a certain type of attitude. It's not necessarily better or for worse. It's just more what I I guess I identify with. So I think some people, they see the West Coast as, oh, it'd be great to go out to the West Coast and chill and be part of nature and I don't know. I miss the East Coast sensibility. Um, Although, I mean, especially now, I feel lucky that I'm in Oregon because the rate of COVID has been lower here. I mean, certainly New York has really suffered, and I think about my friends in New York often, hoping that they're okay and that they're surviving this because it's deep. But in any case, I grew up in Maryland, and I learned to. I was a classical trumpet player initially. That was kind of my thing. I was in bands, elementary school band, middle school band. I didn't enjoy music. I didn't really see it as something that would become a lifelong obsession at first. I didn't like to practice. So I didn't practice trumpet at all until I got to middle school, and I had a great band director named Lee Stevens. And he was sort of the opposite of what I was having in elementary school. Just this head director that was kind of a weird guy and not super inspiring. And then Mr. Stevens sort of flipped it around, and I became obsessed with practicing and obsessed with listening. And I took some music appreciation classes, and I started to get really into classical music and really into jazz music. And I was just listening to records all the time. And
how did he inspire you? Do you remember? Is it because he encouraged you, or he set some kind of high bar for you? Or how does a middle school music teacher do that?
Well, he had a different kind of charisma. Like I remember that, again, I went to middle school, sixth grade, and wasn't really thinking about anything about music. And Mr. Stevens came around to all the classes and just talked about how music was the best class. He said, well, you have to deal with languages, and you have to deal with math, and you have to deal with history and science. And it sounded just super fun. Like he just seemed like a great guy. And, one of the most charismatic teachers I'd ever seen. So I was like, wow, I want to be in this guy's class. So, but the way that he got me practicing was a little bit about me being embarrassed. So the thing is, I still didn't get the idea of competition and the idea of like, you're supposed to get better and work towards things. And I just didn't really have that yet. And so there was a scale exercise he had given as an assignment. And, it was something like, one of those kind of things. And I was like about mid-section of the trumpet section in the concert band. And so we all had to basically get up and play the exercise by ourselves in the class. He said, let's hear one by one play this exercise. So I hadn't practiced it. So I was just kind of like, blah, 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 blah. I was messing it up. And I guess he wanted to teach me a lesson. So he said, all right, you need to go down to last chair. You're now last chair. And so I was really embarrassed. I was like, I don't think I'd ever been that embarrassed, like in a class setting. And I was like, oh, I don't want to have that happen again. So I just started practicing like a maniac. And then, I eventually just kept going up and getting to first chair and so forth.
Yeah. So how does you're going to play for us soon, but I was just wondering, like, how does a short version of how does one become a jazz musician? Because I'm a musician myself, I just practice, become better and better on my instruments. But jazz is such a different species. There's involving so much, I guess, as simple as improvisation. And your key system is so complex.
You know, in a
to
way,
me.
you could. Yes, I see what you mean, but I think that in a way, it's hard for me to understand why classical musicians don't improvise because uh, I mean, I think that oftentimes it's just, the grass is greener, or people look at one side and they say, oh, that's, it's just more being unfamiliar. But I think the mistake, I mean, although there are geniuses of this music, I don't think that I'm particularly a genius. So it's more just there are a few kind of tricks and a few theoretical things that you should know, but there is a system. It's not as mysterious as people think. So there is a logic to it, and it's not as though we're using a lot of the same musical tools that classical musicians and let's say non-improvising musicians use. It's the same notes. It's just that our way of thinking about it is different. It's in the same way that we just kind of know the parts of the language,
Hmm.
in a way that is more like, okay, we're using these tools
Hmm.
as a way to converse, rather than, well, this is like, it's the difference between if you're going to perform
Hmm.
Shakespeare or any play or any script is supposed to be uh, theoretically just written, read and performed word for word.
Hmm.
But in jazz, it's sort of like we're given topics. So the topic might be, the melody, or the topic might be the chord changes. So we just sort of we use those topics of conversation to make new music every time. So it's sort of more open ended. It isn't just like, oh, we're improvising completely freely. Although we can do that too, but
Hmm.
I think that even in that, there's still like, it's sort of like bringing the material together in different ways, in the same way that people converse in a language.
Hmm.
We don't know exactly what we're going to say, but we've been speaking it for so long that we can do it
Hmm.
spontaneously. So that's how
Yeah.
I think of it.
Do you think you can make you, of course you can. Do you think if I give you a simple melody, right? You can just like do like some, improv for us. Like
I can
the melody
try.
is so familiar to everybody. Should we try?
Why not?
Oh, okay. Let's try Twinkle Twinkle.
Uh,
Do the theme first. You have to play the.
so this is
Yeah,
probably a melody that one of my
yeah,
sons, actually both my sons, could probably play this by ear. They're not,
yeah.
they haven't. My oldest has taken lessons
Uh-huh.
on piano.
Yeah.
He kind of likes to play. He likes to kind of make up his own stuff. The
Uh-huh.
little one can play that, and my little one will just come and he'll go.
Yeah.
Um, actually, my oldest taught himself "Happy Birthday," which is not as easy as people think it is.
Yeah. Has
Um,
a larger range, melody.
yeah,
Yeah.
um, I've never improvised on this, but let's see what I can come up with.
Yeah. Nice.
I mean, you know,
Nice.
that's a good test though. I mean, look, well, so that's a perfect example because there's
Mhm,
obviously there are musical elements,
mhm,
and um, but the other things that I played are still there's like known, you know, I know what those chords are, so it's like I
mhm,
basically just reharmonized it and I
mhm,
just changed it up a little bit. I mean, in a way, like sort of limiting yourself, it makes you concentrate on the other element, on the other aspects. So if we have a
mhm.
melody, we know what the melody notes are, but we
Right,
can change the rhythm, we can change the chords, we can change the harmonic rhythm, we can there's all other we can change everything else. So it's like
right,
it's a good challenge
right.
because it's supposed to keep those notes,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. So does jazz musician not only they are like any other musician, they have to learn their own chops on their instrument. Do people have to be really like mastering their scales, their structures, their is I did take a little bit course when I was in school with Baker. What's his name? Um,
David Baker.
David Baker. Yeah,
Oh, really? Where did he go to
yeah,
school?
Indiana
Oh,
University.
right. Yeah, he
Yeah,
was the guy there. I think he's
yeah.
well. He did he pass? I'm trying to remember if he passed
I
away.
don't remember. Probably, yeah. He will be pretty aged. I don't know. I'll double check.
I'm
But
sure he must. He is retired. I'm sure he doesn't teach there
yeah.
anymore.
But it's like it's just so complicated to me. It's not any less complicated than Western music. So how does the African American musician they train themselves? Do they really know the theory like that, or it's in their bones?
Well, you could argue that it's a little bit of both because but I think that this is, I think that in some ways a misconception that you have to be born you have to be born with a certain kind of talent to play jazz, and I don't believe that, but I do think that certainly for a lot of African American musicians, it is they do have cultural exposure to it. It usually depends on your parents. If your parents went to jazz clubs, or played instruments or listened to records or what have you, um, then they might get it. But there's also the disconnect because some people they want to do something different. So you know, uh, it, there are some African Americans who don't aren't particularly interested in jazz. I mean, and it runs the gamut. So um, I think that music is music, and I personally think that music should be for everyone. So if you are interested in playing a certain kind of music, you really have to just listen to it and immerse yourself in the culture. Um, but maybe it could also be a sort of a predisposition to um, a certain type of fearlessness. You
Mhm.
know, being willing to try new things. I mean, I think it's a big step, and I think that in general music education,
Mhm.
even now, even though there are jazz courses, but I still think that we cling to certain concrete ideas in in teaching music. So it's sort of like, well, this is what you do, this is what you do,
Yeah,
and instead of saying, well, here's what you could do,
yeah,
and here's what you might do,
yeah.
or you could do these three things, you have to decide.
Right.
So I mean, I think in a way that's sort of missing from our whole educational system is teaching people how to make choices and teaching people their options and making people feel free to be creative
Hmm.
rather than saying, well, this is what it is, this is what it is.
Yeah.
So particularly, I mean, I think like the difference between a classical performance major
Hmm.
and a composer. When I went to Peabody Conservatory, it was sort of like you were only you could major in performance, but then some people majored in composition, and it was like a big separation between those two things, which I think that everybody should at least explore composition, and I think
Right.
that composers should always be performing. So in jazz, we put that all together, like in a way, although there are some jazz musicians that aren't super into writing music, but they're always creating music when they perform. So we've kind of
Right.
combined the two worlds. So in jazz, it's always about options.
Mm.
It's like, here are your tools, now you decide. So that's where the liberation comes.
Very
Is
democratic.
that
Democratic.
well, it does. I think it does represent that in a way. I think that's one reason why a lot of people love it, because it represents freedom to them. Now I think all freedom comes with the responsibility. So that's the thing. It's not complete freedom. There are limitations. Like,
Right.
I mean, and I think we're sort of seeing a lot of this in our society, like freedom. People feel, it's always like, well, what is the basis for the argument? Like if someone says, well, I shouldn't have to wear a mask, that's limiting my freedom, and it's like, well, wait a minute, you can't just go murder people in the street. That's also like if you said I should be able to kill anyone because this is a free country. It's like, no, it doesn't really work that way, because that's just, at a certain point, what you do affects other people, and this is why we have laws. I mean, if we didn't have that, it would be pandemonium. So it's all within a certain parameters,
Right.
So
So play us more music. I have more.
Okay.
I have a lot of questions for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will play another song. The first tune that I played, by the way, was an older tune called "Train to St Gallen," and I wrote that while riding a train in St Gallen, Switzerland. And just, Switzerland is one of those places that every single view of Switzerland looks like a postcard. It's seems like Switzerland's such a beautiful place. I just feel like seems unfair. I just wonder if people in Switzerland are ever sad because they're just surrounded by so much beauty. It's great country. At least it looks great. So this next song is a brand new tune that I wrote a couple days ago, and it's called "Belief System."
Bravo. Bravo. Jazz music actually is very the intervals a lot of time are very dissonant,
They
right? The
can
way
be,
you
yeah.
the way you play.
Well,
Yeah.
I think that the stuff that I'm interested in is definitely more on the modern side, but
Yeah.
I
Do you
think
call yourself your style? Do you call this modern jazz?
I like to think so, but honestly, a lot of the concepts that I'm working with are, decades old. So it's not like it's hard to say, like, when we talk about what's modern,
Uh-huh.
that could mean so many things. I mean, I think some people think that if it's modern, if in order to be modern, it has to be super cutting edge. I think it's all relative. I mean, there are some people who consider themselves to be more traditional
Uh-huh.
jazz players,
Uh-huh.
and in a way, a lot of the stuff I do, just based on what year I'm drawing on, and what year those particular concepts first occurred. It is more traditional in a way. I mean, but there is a term that we use called modern mainstream, which is like, it's sort of like right in the middle. It's like, it's not super avant-garde necessarily. It's not sort of like trying to be the next new thing, but it's also
Yeah.
not trying to be like Dixieland,
Yeah.
early jazz, like, Louis Armstrong type of music,
Or or take the A train.
Right. Well,
Do you know how to play that thing? Take the A train.
yeah, I do. I mean, in a way, but in a way, like, that's been one of the things that I think jazz musicians have sort of been seeing, how the old elements and the new elements can combine.
Yeah.
And so it's, like the old elements are just as important, and I think it's important to acknowledge those. Like, what people don't realize is that, like, for me, one of the first pianists I listened to was Fats Waller. I don't necessarily play like Fats Waller, but without him, I would have to acknowledge his influence is important. But I don't necessarily want to sound like that. So that's the thing, is like, when people say influence, people can be influenced by music and by anything really without that explicitly being obvious.
Yeah.
Um,
You know what I
think
call you? Sorry. You know
Go
what I
ahead.
call you? I don't know if we haven't really talked about music before today, but
Right.
I call you a young Chick Corea. Is that a good compliment?
Sure. Well, here's the thing. I mean, I've listened to a lot of Chick Corea, but
Yeah.
he isn't my only influence.
Yeah.
I mean, and the other thing too is that Chick Corea was very influenced by McCoy Tyner, and Chick Corea was also influenced a lot by classical music, and he was also influenced a lot by Cecil Taylor and things like that. So those I personally believe that a good jazz musician has many influences, not just one. I mean, I think that is where it starts to become very obvious, you
Hmm.
know. But I think like I draw on a lot of different things. So
Yeah. Yeah. You
and I
know,
just try to
yeah, go ahead. You
I just
say,
try to put it together in my own way, you know.
yeah. You know, George, I've been doing classical music for all my life until, last like 15 years. I'm more serious about media work.
Yes.
But I taught in a college 15 years. I taught music appreciation classes, and
Hmm.
all my students, they're non-music majors, and they live on Long Island, but many of them have never been in the city and went to Carnegie Hall. And then
Wow.
I squeezed the curriculum. I actually taught them jazz history. So I
Hmm.
squeezed one day, 3 hours of jazz history. And I was very surprised many of them don't know jazz. So my
Yeah.
question for you is, how is jazz dying? Just like somebody said classical music's dying. And how and why? I don't know how we're going to encourage more young people to appreciate jazz more, and how do
This is
we
a
keep
very good question. It's a very
yeah,
good question. I mean, there are so many factors, and I think the digital age has its pros and cons. I mean, what's very interesting is that now you can access almost anything online. I mean, you
yeah,
can go on YouTube, you can go on Spotify, you can do whatever streaming it is, anything on TV. I mean, it's the dig. This is it's weird how it is the age of information, but it is also kind of an age of disinformation. I mean, politically, that's a whole other story. But I think just in terms of media,
mm,
it's like, how do we get like just because anybody can put out a recording doesn't
mm,
mean that everybody should put out a recording. So it's like everybody's just putting out this content, and how does who's to say what's important or more important? So and why is it more important? So this is where we have to sort of ask those questions. And who is the, as my father used to say, the arbiter of taste? So you know, is jazz worthy of being heard? Yes, but can we force people? I think having music appreciation classes is really great. Are we having those as requirements in school? You know, are we teaching our kids that culture is important, that it's not just whatever's on the radio? You know, I mean, that's sort of become for many decades the idea in America is just whatever's on the radio and whatever your friends are listening to, and nobody actually. This is where I'm talking about people making a choice, like, you know, I mean, it's sort of whatever is put in front of them rather than like, well, is there anything else interesting? So doing research,
mm-hmm,
you know, now
mm-hmm,
you can, but people don't know where to start, and they also get overwhelmed. Like a lot of my music students, I think it's hard for them to really focus on any music. You know, they listen to just a little bit on Spotify and they're like, oh, let me go to the next thing. And so they don't listen to a whole album. They don't actually sit down and listen to a whole album
right,
and take it in, take in the experience the way I did when I was a kid, where we had no other options. I mean, it's amazing to think of how many different things I mean, when I was a kid and when you were a kid, you couldn't just go on Netflix and watch 50,000 different shows. You couldn't do
yeah,
that. I grew up, 70s and 80s. We had three channels, maybe one local station, so essentially four channels.
mm,
And I had a record player and
mm,
the radio, and that was it. So
yeah,
it was sort of a, this is your information,
right,
and you took it in differently, and you appreciated it, and you really like chewed on it for a while. Like I
I,
used to listen to records over and over because there wasn't anything else to do. I had a limited amount. I didn't have like like in a sense, if you have Spotify,
yeah,
you have however many, like all of
million,
music. Yeah, it's you can't even. I mean, who's even keeping track of this stuff? So
Mm.
you could just listen to a little, like 5 seconds of everything, or you could say, well, I'm going to really focus on this artist and really listen to it. How about once through or twice through, and say, okay, I have a real sense of this, because that's how this music is supposed to be absorbed, you know.
Yeah.
It's whereas now with, I mean, pop music is sort of like, in a way, it's sort of like the way you eat. I mean, I know that I'm not the first person to make an analogy for eating and music, the way we compute, but it's like the way you eat like a chocolate bar. It's sort of like it tastes like chocolate. You eat it, you consume it quickly, you know. And whereas, you know, a 4-course home cooked meal is a more deep experience. You don't want to, you can't live on just eating chocolate bars, you know, every 45 minutes. You know what I mean? You have to sit down and have a real meal.
Yeah.
So to me, that's what art music is. It's something that should be absorbed and listened to and experienced. It's like a movie. I mean, a real movie or a book, you know, you have to spend some time with it.
Right.
Whereas a lot of things now are just sort of like sound bites. I mean, it's a lot of political slogans. It's like, you can't, nobody knows. Like, I mean, if you ask the average, I mean, I don't know if you want to get into this now, but like the average, let's say they support whomever, you know,
Right.
and you say, well, why do you support this person? It's like, well, he's going to build a wall. It's like, well, what has he done beyond that? They don't know. They have no idea. They don't even want to know. They just know that he's going to build a wall. That those three words is all they want to take in. That's it. And so that's a shame, is that we can't, I mean, that we can't have a real conversation, and we really can't get into things in a deep way. I mean, you know, one of the things I always say about the problem with jazz is that you actually have to listen to it. You know, so I mean, that's the thing. You gotta you can't necessarily tell what it's going to be in 1 second or in 5 seconds. You have to let it go. Just like classical music. I mean, you could hear the first bars of a Beethoven symphony, but there's way more to it than that. So and Beethoven didn't expect you to have to go anywhere. He's like, look, I have this piece of music. You can't just hear 5 seconds of it. You got to sit down and hear the whole thing. You know?
I thought about, like, just right now, like when you were comparing about food, right? It's also another analogy is people love eating ramen noodles, right? They cook some hot water, they pour it in. So within 5 minutes, you can eat your noodles. They're delicious, but they're full of chemicals. And if you eat too much, you'll become dumb. But if you cook a meaningful stew, either it's a chicken or beef takes longer. You really need 3 hours to keep adding things in it to cook it. You cannot make a beef stew done in 30 minutes. It just won't do it. So it's a little bit similar analogy, because when something is profound, when something has its roots or history, it's definitely it's a longer tasting process, a longer making process, and longer more depth of enjoying it, I think. So jazz music, I don't know why. This art is American art. This art is invented by us, Americans. So it's something I always tell my student, it's a shame. I always want them to at least to know it, even if they haven't heard it before, because it's our music. It's their music, So
I agree 100%. I mean, it's unclear. I mean, I think that, when you look at the swing era, which is arguably the last time that jazz was really America's popular music, it was for dancing. So people like to dance, I think, and I think many people who like to dance doesn't necessarily matter what the music is. I think it's just if it is danceable. And I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that serves a great purpose. Dancing is great. People should be happy and have a good time, but at a certain point, jazz started to shift and become a little bit more like art music. And then that definitely turned off some people. So, and then there've been other moves to kind of bring the dance back, and it's kind of gone back and forth. And I personally think that the 1970s was a period in jazz and American popular music in general when you kind of had the best of both worlds. You had a lot of depth, technical and spiritual and musical depth, but there was also like the rock and roll. When we talk about jazz rock or fusion, it had that excitement. It had the relevance, the cultural relevance. And then it's in some ways arguable that we lost that a little bit with the rise of the Young Lions in the 1980s and 1990s. It kind of went back into a little bit more of a traditional mode, and maybe some people sort of lost interest at that point. So I really think that there are more people that like jazz than we realize. And there are also more people that would like jazz if it was presented to them. Maybe in a slightly different way. I mean, it's really interesting because, I also teach some classes that would probably be considered more music appreciation. I teach jazz history and jazz and American culture at Portland State. And a lot of those people have never heard any jazz. And a lot of them end up really coming away as, if not fans, they really have a new appreciation for it. And at the very least, I don't necessarily want them to, I can't force them to become, the biggest jazz fans in the world, but at least I can maybe get them to think about what they're listening to a little bit more. You know what I mean? Because I think some people just sort of, maybe they hear the melody, maybe they feel like it's danceable, but they don't ever think, well, what makes this song better than that song? Or what makes this group more interesting? Or why do I feel this way? Or where does this music even come from? So, so that type of thing.
We have some audience members made a comment. Awesome jazz improv. He's referring to when you did a Twinkle Twinkle.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So would you like to play for us some more, please?
Sure, of course. Always. Let's see. I'm going to play a slower tune. This is from a few years ago. This is called Wounds of Another Time.
Okay, great. Beautiful.
Thank you.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
So yeah, you have worked with so many great musicians. Some are tap dancers, some are percussionists, and
Yeah.
some. I saw you at the Smoke
Hmm.
last. Uh, I would say
Fall, last fall. I
October,
think it was.
October,
I think it was
October,
December.
December. Oh, okay,
I think so. Yeah, beginning of
December.
this, or maybe late November, beginning of
Okay,
December.
all right,
Yeah.
yeah. So you worked with this
Buster
very
Williams.
yes. Tell me a little bit about and that album. I bought the album. I listened to it. It's really wonderful.
Right. So that was the album Audacity, I
Yes,
believe.
Audacity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Um, well, Buster Williams is one of the great bassists and one of the great composers and one of the great figures in jazz. Is one of the few living legends. Still performing, still active. He's also teaching. Um, sort of underappreciated. There is a documentary film about him. I'm not sure how widely it's being shown, but there is a documentary about him that's pretty cool. Um, and he speaking of people who've played with everybody. I mean, Buster is one of those people who's literally played with everybody in jazz. Art Blakey, Freddie Hubbard, Sarah Vaughan, Nancy Wilson, the Crusaders, Herbie Hancock. I mean, it goes on and on and on. I mean, Count Basie. I mean, he worked with everybody. So there's always. I mean, I feel fortunate just to be able to have spent time with him and get a perspective.
Hmm.
Because oftentimes people of my age or younger, I mean, and this is when I talk about the history and sort of like whether anybody feels like they're doing something new.
Mm.
I might play something that I think is very interesting, but Buster heard Herbie Hancock play that 40, 50 years ago.
Mm.
So, I mean, Buster started his career in the late 50s with
Mm.
Gene Ammons and Sonny Stitt. So, he's been playing steadily since
Yeah.
then.
Yeah.
And it just has always been a part of the music. So, it's important that we respect that younger musicians respect the older cats,
That's Buster.
whether they want to necessarily model them or whether they want to play with those people or do their own thing or whatever. I think this is one thing. I think we have to respect at least what older musicians have been through
Right.
and try to get something from them.
Right.
So I'm fortunate that I was able to do that. I didn't take lessons with Buster. I played with him. So in a way, I consider him one of my mentors.
Mm.
And when I first started playing with him, I don't know if I really appreciated that. I mean,
Oh. Was he hard? Is he a hard person? Like criticize you?
I have been lucky. I've been lucky, and maybe that's something I as a feather I can put in my cap, because I know Buster can be tough on people. Look, if you've been playing that long, you develop strong opinions. I mean,
Yeah.
like I said, like I think a lot of, like, I mean, even for myself, I feel that way, because when a young musician comes to me and they say, "Hey, listen to me play this,"
Mm.
and I'm like, "All right, sounds good," or whatever. I mean, but to them, they're like, "Well, I aren't you impressed?" I'm like, "Well, no, I'm not. I mean, I think it's good, but I'm not particularly impressed. I mean, I've been doing this for over 30 years, so."
Mhm.
And I think Buster has been doing it even longer. So it would make sense that anything I play or somebody else would play wouldn't be particularly impressive. And I think we always have to remember that
Mm.
it's not necessarily that that anyone's trying to be a jerk. It's just that, like, look, I've heard this for decades. So
Mm-hmm.
so Buster, he takes the music seriously, and that's one uh, with a lot of the older generation,
Mm-hmm.
and particularly African American musicians.
Mm-hmm.
This, to me, the music was everything to them,
Mm-hmm.
and it was really part of the culture. So if somebody's not taking it seriously, they're up. It's like the way, if somebody desecrates the American flag, somebody who served in World War II,
Mm-hmm.
to them that's disgraceful. They're like, I stormed the beach at Normandy
Mm-hmm.
to represent um, American values. I fought for that flag. You should not desecrate the flag. That's
Mm-hmm.
so. In the same way, when a musician who isn't taking the music seriously gets up and plays a tune and doesn't play well,
Mm-hmm.
older musicians, it's not just like, oh, you didn't sound good. It's offensive to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's where people, I think, get confused. They think, oh, well, that person's just a jerk, and it's like,
Yeah.
no, you're trampling on their flag.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Like that's and I'm starting to feel the same way. Although I in an educational standpoint, you have to be a little bit more forgiving, because otherwise, no one would come to Portland State and
Yeah.
and be a part of our program. So, but that's the thing, is like, if you're gonna play this music, you have to take it seriously. So, so that's one thing I learned from playing with Buster Williams and also the drummer Lenny White, is
Mm-hmm.
that they've never known, they've always played with the most serious musicians. So they expect they don't want to be on the bandstand with people that don't feel the same way.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
that is an ongoing lesson for me.
Right.
And it it's like, that's one thing that I'm grateful for, is that I was able to learn that lesson on the bandstand night after years and years
Mm-hmm.
of doing it. So
Right. So, COVID-19, it's about 3 months now, and who knows, it's gonna totally open. This is really directly affecting your performance engagement, right? So how do you
oh
deal with
yeah.
that? How do you? Yeah.
It's very it's turned every musician, it's turned their world upside down, because there's and there was no preparation for this. No one knew. I mean, it was literally within a week. It was and what's interesting is that it's ironic, because Buster had been offered some gigs in China. We
Oh,
were supposed to play the Blue Note in, I guess, Shanghai
yes. Sean has a
and
balloon, right?
Beijing. We were
Yeah.
supposed to do that, and it's the first time I've ever. I played in Hong Kong years ago, but the first time I would have ever been to Shanghai or
Yeah.
Beijing, and I was excited about it. And then I said, "Oh, what is this thing they're talking about? A virus?"
Yeah.
And then we were debating whether to go.
Yeah.
We would have gone in May. It was
Oh,
planned to be end of April,
oh,
May,
darn it.
and we
Wow.
were like, and I think Buster had said, like, "Oh, it's probably going to pass,"
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then they ended up saying, well, let's move it to September. Now I don't know
Yeah.
what the status is about it.
Wow.
But I mean, but I never would have imagined that all of a sudden the whole world would be shutting down. I mean, I
You know.
never imagined that. And it all kind of happened within a week or two. It was like,
Yeah.
well, we're shutting down. So all my gigs, March, April, May,
Yeah.
all gone.
Oh gosh.
And that's never happened before. Never.
And
Never.
you've been doing regularly on Facebook. Do you
Yes.
have a fixed time? Tell us, when do you do your live on Facebook so people
I
can
do
follow?
Facebook Live every Sunday at 2 p.m. Pacific time, and I
Okay.
just do an hour of solo piano.
Okay.
It's right here. This is the
Okay.
concert hall.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
and I also put your information, PayPal and Vimeo, into the below the description. So if people want to help out,
oh, okay,
the
great.
yeah. So I yeah. So people who are listening right now, and also anybody, if you have not subscribed Juhl Media channel, and considering subscribing my channel, and also George has is very active on many social media. He has a handsome uh, YouTube channel. And what else you have? You have a Facebook under your
Yeah,
name.
yeah, Facebook and
Yeah.
YouTube
And
and
you
all that
have a
stuff.
great website.
Oh,
Your
thank you.
website is very
Yeah,
handsome. Yeah, very
thank
nice.
you,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, has a lot of information on it. So
Mhm.
we are about 5 minutes near. You need to go teaching. Would you like to
Yes.
play a little bit more, or would you like to do a rapid? What do you call rapid fire, or both?
Oh, let's do the rapid fire. I want to
Really?
see what that's like. Yeah. I'm afraid, but I'm also curious.
These all silly questions. Okay, we do rapid fire. Okay, all right. And then maybe you can play more. Okay, even we'll do fast. So, if
Okay.
you only have one drink at happy hour, which one?
Um, sparkling water. Sparkling water.
Are you serious?
Well, okay. I mean, if this was 10 years ago, I would have Russian standard vodka neat, but I don't do that anymore.
Really?
I don't do
Serious?
that anymore. Yeah.
Really? Oh, that's very
But the day is young, so we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Okay. So, any other language other than English you speak?
I used to be able to function in Spanish because I used to go to Spain quite a bit, but I haven't been in the past few years, so it's gone a little by the wayside. But I used to be able to get around in
Okay.
Spain.
Cool.
So
Ice
yeah,
cream flavors.
um, strawberry.
Other instrument you want to learn?
Well, I mean, I play piano, I play trumpet, I play drums, I play bass a little bit.
Yeah. Anything
I
else?
would love to learn. I'd love to learn guitar, and I feel like I should have been an alto saxophone player.
How about viola?
No, no, no. Nobody wants to learn viola. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
I know, I know.
No, viola strings are hard. I mean, just I think bass is plenty for stringed instruments for me.
Yeah, bass.
Yeah.
Yeah. Favorite type of food or cuisine?
Probably Japanese. I used to eat Chinese food every day in the 90s, like literally every day I ate Chinese food for a couple years, every day.
It's funny.
Because I lived in Rockville, Maryland, and there
Mhm.
were probably 10 Chinese restaurants within a two-mile
Oh,
radius. So,
okay.
and they
Oh,
just knew me.
oh,
They knew my name, and they just
yeah,
knew what I wanted. They just walk in and yeah. So
yeah,
that and I'd say Chinese, Japanese,
yeah.
pretty much.
Great.
That's yeah.
How often do you do physical exercise, and what physical exercise you do?
Um, I I try to do something every day. I've been even with COVID, I'm able to find a route when I leave my house that there's almost no one around. I
Mhm.
do bring a mask if I feel like I'm going to be around people, but I'm social distancing and I'm mostly alone when I run. So I've been
Yeah,
doing a lot of long runs. I used to go to the gym, but the gym is closed, so I do some body weight exercises and I have a few little dumbbells here. So it's basically just the weights and running.
great. Countries you would like to live for like more than 3 months a year?
Anywhere but the United States.
That's not
uh,
very patriotic.
I mean, I'd love to live in New Zealand or Australia right about now.
Mhm.
Parts of any place that's really dealt with COVID in a mature, intelligent, responsible way, which is not the U.S. unfortunately.
Yeah,
So
yeah. Great. What is your favorite color?
Blue.
Blue. The book you read last book you read.
I'm trying
Haven't
to
read.
think.
Haven't read for a while.
I started this book on Frederick Douglass.
Uh-huh.
It's a biography. I'm like halfway through it.
Oh.
There's another book I just can't think of it right now.
Mm. Last question. Tea or coffee?
Oh, coffee, please. I have 2 children.
Oh yeah.
I need
May I
coffee.
ask how old are they? May I?
5 and 10.
Oh my god, that's a lot of work. Wonderful
Yeah.
though. Yeah.
Yeah. Luckily, they stayed out of the room
Yeah.
while I did this.
So it's 1 minute to 5:10. You want to play a little bit and we wrap up?
I'll play something short.
Okay. Please, I'm sure. Beautiful. What is that?
That's called Usain, dedicated to Usain Bolt.
Yeah. Oh, I still have one question. Like, how many hours do you practice? Do you practice every day?
At this point, and for the last few years, I've basically just tried to get some amount of time. I don't know how much, because like if I'm doing it here or even at school, it's sort of like just finding a few minutes here, a few minutes there. But I try to do a little bit every day. So it could be like if I get up early enough and no one's awake, I can get some practicing in. If I go to bed late sometimes, just here. But it has not been like it was in the early 90s. That's the last time that I really, there was a period where I was practicing all the time between 4 and 8 hours every day and playing gigs every night.
Wow.
And that's what I consider my real blessing of growth, being able to grow during that time. But when you have kids, it's impossible.
Yeah. Thank you so much, George. I know you have something to do.
Yes,
my lighting,
thank you.
Yeah, my lighting is getting really low because I think there's a storm outside pretty soon. So that's
Uh-oh.
So, but your lighting is good. Your sound is very good, and thank you so much for your music, and thank you for talking to me. And until next time, and you be safe.
Anytime. I hope to see you at
Yeah.
some point.
Yeah, come to New York and let's hang out.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you,
Thanks, Shane.
audience,
Thank you.
to watch. Thank you for watching.
Thanks,
our
everybody.
audience. Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye bye.